So today is a big day. We are finally wrapping up our study on the fruits of the Spirit. I honestly have lost track of when we started. I think it was in the fall, wasn't it? No, it was after Christmas. It was after Christmas. So at least we're in the same year. But it took us a good several months to get through it because there's 9 of them, right? And then we started out talking about the soils. And so there's been 13 lessons in all. Thank you for sticking with me and working through it. But I hope that you've gained some insights into the fruit of the Spirit from this book and from these lessons. Lord, why did I say Lord? I hope the Lord has helped us gain some insight. So today we come to the very last fruit of the Spirit, and that is self-control. So it may be last, but it is not the least, right? And self-control, I think, is the thing that we all struggle with the most. Or I can at least speak for myself, that of all the things on this list, it's probably the hardest one to really grow and reflect on our lives on a regular basis. So as we've done for every one of these fruits of the Spirit, we've tied it back to love. And so this one is no different. When we go back again to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, so kind of our manual on love, if you will, we can still see self-control reflected as an attribute of love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, that says, love does not insist on its own way. That's the English Standard Version. In other versions, it says, it doth not behave itself unseemly, or it does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. And that's a picture of self-control, isn't it? Of relinquishing ourselves and not letting it be controlled by outside forces. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. It's to go along with the garden metaphor that we've been using through all of these lessons. This is probably the fruit that's the most spotty. So imagine even trying to grow grass, right? So if you're trying to grow grass for the first time in a barren piece of dirt, sometimes it doesn't take. And so you end up with bare spots, and you have to put extra seed over those areas, or if it's in the shade, you've got to put some special seed over it in order to finally get to that lush, consistent bed of grass. And that's exactly what self-control is, I think, is that it's pretty spotty. We try to grow it, but we end up with bare spots all over the place. And so we need some help in getting those bare spots filled in and developing that self-control in our lives. So sometimes we're angels, right? Sometimes we're good, we act dignified, we're very commendable, we were reflecting the other fruits of the Spirit, we're kind, we're good. And then problems happen. And what happens to our attitudes? Well, they kind of take a different turn, and we can explode like a bomb or erupt like a volcano. And that's where, we're lacking that self-control, that consistency to have the right reactions to those outside forces that impact our lives. And so there's an example of this, Olin, in James chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. So if you want to go ahead and read that passage.
Do you mind if I start with 8?
That's fine. Go ahead.
8 sets it up. It says, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Mm-hmm. Then 9 says, with it. So that's, so you know what it's talking about. With it, we bless our God and Father, and with it, we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, this thing ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh.
Right. So it's that contrast and it reflects who we are. We've got like it's that old image of the angel and the demon on our shoulder. That some of the time we're good and we're well controlled, and other times we're not. And out of the same person, we have these opposite reactions and emotions and feelings. And bringing that under control. Actually, that whole chapter, Olin, or the first part of that chapter, I had to kind of just pick a good place to start because there's a lot of good stuff in James chapter 3 about taming the tongue and this kind of conflict that we constantly have going on in our lives. And then at the end of that passage that you read, it brings it back to the whole, again, agriculture, growing, gardening analogy that, you know, a fig tree can't grow olives. And what was the other one? That a grapevine cannot produce figs. And then you also, even with the same type of fruit. So let's talk about grapes again. One of the things we started out talking about with the fruit of the Spirit. What happens when you pick a grape off the bunch and you're just anticipating its sweetness and you're just looking forward to it, and then you bite into it and it's sour. And it just makes your mouth go, Rrr. And you know, you're not expecting that. So even though things may even look consistent, so we're not trying to get figs out of a grapevine, we got grapes, but they're not all good. And so sometimes that sourness represents a bit of our old selves, that we're putting forth a pretty good front where we look like a grape, but we've got a few sour ones mixed into the bunch. And so how do we take care of that? And what does self-control really mean? So the one thing that we want to put out right at the beginning, that self-control does not mean that with severe self-discipline I can control my conduct. I mean, that's the assumption, right? Is when you hear the term self-control, you're thinking, well, if I can just get a hold of myself, and if I can just be really disciplined, and I can grin and bear it, and I can be really stoic and reserved and determined, that I can control myself. Well, we've learned through all of these fruits of the Spirit, that's why they're fruits of the Spirit. We can't do this ourselves. We weren't created to do this ourselves. And so for the Christian, self-control means that self, my whole being, my body, my soul, my mind, comes under the control of Christ, that we're governed by God, that every aspect of our life, spiritual and physical, we've surrendered and we're allowing to be controlled by God. So in this case, self-control means that we are relinquishing control and saying, God, you take control of myself, so that He can help us get to that point of consistency, or at least a little more often than we do, and reflect self-control a bit more consistently in our lives. Again, in the gardening metaphor, it's like giving the gardener full control of the entire plot of ground that we have. Rod?
I think of the contrast of soldiers, like Navy SEALs or whatever, who really, a lot of them, when you get to know them, they're more foul-mouthed, really bad habits, and all of that. Self-control here, it's funny because it's just the opposite. It's like letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Like letting go of everything, and letting God control how you, and then every day starting over again and re-forgiving, all of those things.
Yeah.
Not holding the grudges and everything, and just allowing yourself to let go. It's just the opposite.
It's the opposite of what you think the word means.
Yeah.
Intuitively, we want to just take it literally before controlling ourselves, but we can't in and of ourselves. And so it's letting go, letting God control and be in control of our lives. So like usual, who is our best example of self-control? Well, I'll tell you for sure it's not other people, all right? Because even the sweetest saints get a little sour sometimes, right? So just think back of all the people in your lives that you think are saintly, and you can probably come up with a moment when they lost their cool. I'm sure maybe even Mother Teresa got angry once or twice. Maybe it was righteous anger, who knows. But still, we're human by nature, so we can't look to ourselves or to each other as being examples of self-control. But of course, Christ was the perfect example, as he is of all of the fruit of the Spirit. And he was truly God-controlled. And as he reiterated multiple times throughout the Gospels, that he was sent by the Father. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So every part of him, everything he did, he was never manipulated. He was never, he was unflappable. He was just consistent and stable in everything that he did and in every interaction that he had. Even think about from the time of his betrayal until his crucifixion, that he just was calm when he was being questioned by the Sanhedrin and by the chief priests. He didn't lash out. He didn't, just say, you guys are foolish. You don't know who you're dealing with. No, he was just calm and God-controlled through the entire experience and through everything that he did. So that's the model. Obviously, we're never going to rise to that level, but it's our what we're striving to be is more like Christ and reflecting that stability. So why do we find ourselves in messes and stressed out and anxious and blowing up at people when we get upset? It's kind of like when we talked about the thorny ground, how the cares of this world choke out the good fruit, and we allow the cares of this world to get to us to the point where we react, and we have that kind of negative response. And we're still stubborn. We're afraid to relinquish it to God. We're afraid to let God have that entire garden of our lives. We want to keep part of it of ourselves. We want to still fix ourselves and still be in control. And we want to do our own thing and control our own destiny. That's the funny thing, is that we think that we can control our own destiny, that we can determine our own future. How crazy is that? It is totally not up to us. It is not in our control. It is in God's control. And we are just his instruments here on earth. So we need to say, God, we need to recognize that God, you are in control and you have my destiny in mind. But thankfully, God hasn't written us off. He still comes to us in his gentle self-control. He's patient with us, as we talked about again in the other fruits of the Spirit, his goodness, his kindness. And he says, I'm going to walk beside you, and I'm going to be your master gardener, and I'm going to help you grow this self-control that will make you a better person. And that gives us hope, right? So if we didn't have him, if we didn't have that master gardener standing by, ready to help us grow and change, we would be utterly lost. But because he's there, that gives us hope that in spite of who we are, in spite of the fact that we blew up at our spouse or our kids yesterday or the driver in front of us, that God is still there. He's still bringing us in and saying, I'm here to help you. Just lean on me and let me help you grow that fruit. So it comes with the need to put our whole being under Christ's control. So our spirit, which includes intuition and conscience, our soul, which is our mind and our emotions and our will, and our body even. And I think, Judy, you commented on the Facebook post that, are you talking about eating desserts because guilty is charged? And I'm right there with you. But it's every aspect of our lives. It's easy to get, to see where we're doing things wrong, maybe with the way we eat or the way we drive, or those physical aspects of our lives. But it's the whole enchilada. It's the whole being. We've got to surrender our minds and our spirits and our bodies to his control. And it doesn't happen by chance. We have to be intentional about it. We have to intentionally relinquish that control. We need to verbally say, God, I need your help with gaining control of my mind and of my emotions and of my imaginations, because our minds are probably the worst, right? We let our minds run rampant and take advantage of us. And Sarah, I'm sure you can relate, especially right now, that you get some bad news and immediately you're going to the worst case scenario. And before you know it, you're making yourself physically ill because you're thinking about what if the worst happens. And the same about just relationships. And somebody didn't respond to an email, or they responded in a way and you don't really know what they mean, and you begin to think about, well, maybe they don't like me, and maybe this is, maybe they're being mean, and it may not be that at all, but our brains, our minds, our imagination just will take it and run with it. And we've got to say, Lord, I surrender that to you. And Romans 12:2, Marlena.
Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Okay, so be transformed by what? The renewing of your mind. And that's where we surrender that and allow our minds to be renewed through him. Rod.
What you didn't read was verse 1, where it talked about being a living sacrifice.
Right.
Problem with a living sacrifice is it crawls off the altar.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Christy, the other thing is that, I teach a lot of this in class with kids and families. I just can't call it the fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
What if we want our minds to be focused on this? We want God to help us. I think part of our participation is what we feed our minds.
True. That's true.
What we listen to, what we watch, what we see, those kinds of things. If we're feeding our minds things that are not peaceful, that are not kind, that are negative, then it's really going to be hard.
True.
To live the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Philippians 4:8. I didn't put it up there, but we've talked about this one multiple times about whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are of good report. Think on these things. And so it goes back to, what do we put in our mind? Well, we're often not putting the greatest things there. And so if we're thinking on the things that are lovely and true and good report, then that begins to allow us to change our inner attitude. Hard to do. I'm up here preaching to myself, but it's a constant struggle that we have to think, okay, this is not lovely, true, and of good report. What else can I put in my mind that would help me better reflect that? Similarly with our emotions or our inner attitudes, they can be unpredictable. We never know what situation we're going to find ourselves in. And so again, like this family, the Bumgarners, whose son with the brain tumor, one day they had no idea, and the next day their lives changed completely. We don't know what we're going to find ourselves in, and then the emotions that brings up, the reactions that we have, sadness, grief, anger, bitterness, all those things just, boom, they come out of nowhere. You can think that you're being as self-controlled as possible, and yet there's still things that will bring up that well of negative reactions. And it also goes back to, when we look at the passage where the fruits of the Spirit are listed in Galatians chapter 5, the verses preceding that, verses 19 through 21, recount all of those things that we should not be. Everything that represents our old life. So liars and drunkards and abusers, and it's all there. And he's saying, don't be that. I want to transform you into this. And then we have to surrender our will. That's the big one. Surrendering our will to God. This is the deep, permanent decisions about what direction we're going to go. And A person who is determined to do his own will can never truly please God, because it's, again, not up to us. It is not our choice to make. It is not our destiny to decide, or our decision that will determine our destiny. We need to say, God, we want our will to be like your will. Just as Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane said, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. And that is a model prayer that we all need to be praying. Not just Jesus on the night before his crucifixion, but every day. Lord, not my will, but your will. Philippians 2:13-15. Leslie, was that yours?
No, that's not.
That was Russ's. She wanted the short one at the end. Okay.
I got.
You got this. All right, Russ.
Interesting above it says light bearers, and therefore also read 12. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. Do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among who you shine as lights in the world. And the reason I read that, I know, is because I fall pretty short on all that. That's why she didn't get it and I did. But
Lord knew. Yeah. Yeah, so he works in us to do his will and his good pleasure, and do everything without grumbling or complaining. Wow, okay, hard to do, especially when you feel like you're justified in something you're going to grumble and complain about. You know, you were done wrong, or you've been asked to do more, you're doing more than the other person. It's not fair. Do everything without grumbling or complaining, okay? He works in us to do his will and his good pleasure. And the same goes for our physical needs too. Our physical bodies, our appetites, our attitudes, our physical. We need to give all those physical desires to God and say, God, you help me control this. Take control of everything. So how do we do that? Well, I mentioned it earlier. We literally need to pray for it, like out loud, verbally. Ask God, God, I need to surrender every part of my life to you. Every inch of this garden is yours, and I want you to cultivate it and help it to grow. And the thing about this, and this is where we're kind of getting into the wrap-up of the entire study on the fruit of the Spirit, is that none of this is going to happen overnight, right? So when you're growing a garden, if you plant a seed today, are you going to come out tomorrow and see a ripe red tomato to pick? Absolutely not. What does it require? It takes time, and it takes patience and persistence and care and attention in order to grow that fruit. And that's exactly how these fruits of the Spirit will develop in our lives, is we have to give them time. And we have to just nurture it and continually go back to God and ask for his control, ask for his assistance in helping us grow all of these fruits. And so if you think about it, you're growing, first we'll grow a flower, like a fruit tree, and then that flower will develop into fruit that eventually you can pick and enjoy. But it's a process. It's not an immediate change. So don't have unrealistic expectations either, that, don't expect that if you pray that prayer today, God help me, I relinquish control to you, that tomorrow you're going to be perfect. You know what? This is going to last the rest of our lives. We're going to be continually praying that prayer, God, I relinquish control to you today. And tomorrow I'm probably going to pray it again, and the day after that. But what will also happen is that others around you will begin to see the change. It's just like when your kids were growing up, and I'm sure that when you go to visit your family in Memphis, and when they see Angelia, they're going to be like, wow, you've grown. But Angelia, do you look any different today than you looked yesterday when you look at yourself in the mirror? No, you don't see it. We don't see it ourselves, but others will see it in us. They will look at us and say, wow, you're really different from who you were 2 years ago. And I can tell that something's working in you. And so it just requires that continual, patient persistence growing. And what we talked about in our lesson on gentleness is the branch with the most fruit bows lowest on the tree. You know, you can't miss it. And that fruit will begin to extend out and be within reach of those who we interact with. So when it comes to the fruit of the Spirit, it all boils down to looking at our lives. What are we producing? And what kind of crops are coming up? And is the master satisfied? Is he getting what he wanted to get? And if we're honest with ourselves, we're not always there. And so we want to just continually be asking for that on, you know, what can we do to help improve the production of fruit in our lives? So the yield of eternal fruit is directly proportional to the degree in which my life is yielded to him. The amount of eternal fruit is directly related to how much I'm willing to give to the gardener, how much control I'm willing to give to him. And so are you giving up your life? Are you surrendering your whole being to him? Or are you holding back and saying, nope, I want to keep control of this piece because I think I can handle it pretty well. God, you can have the rest. No, we got to give it all. It doesn't matter if we think that we can do part of it better, because I guarantee you we can't. And so it's that full and complete surrender that will help that garden grow and help these fruits develop in our lives. John 3:30.
He must become greater, I must become less.
And who said that? That was John the Baptist, who was talking about Jesus and said, he must increase and I must decrease. And, you know, there's even t-shirts out there and things that you can buy to remind us of this, but, you know, it's something that has to always be in the forefront, that he must increase and I must decrease. I must get out of the business of trying to grow my own garden and allow the master gardener to help me grow it. It's that building of character, that development of fruit, and noticing those changes in our lives. And wanted to close with this verse from Isaiah chapter 27. It says, in that day, a pleasant vineyard, sing of it. I, the Lord, am its keeper. Every moment I water it, lest anyone punish it. I keep it night and day. That's God speaking of us and of the vineyard that he's planted in our lives. And let's let him make that transformation. Let him grow that fruit so that we can be what he envisioned us to be, that we can be the crop that he was seeking to yield from our lives. And if we do that, then I think we will find great reward. So that, my friends, is our study on the fruits of the Spirit. Again, I hope that it's been a learning, it's been a journey. We've talked about a lot of different things, and to be honest, most of it's common sense. You didn't need me up here every week to tell you some of these things, but sometimes we just need to be reminded that God is at work in us, and it's all about surrendering ourselves in order to grow the fruit that he wants us to bear. I think we're out of time unless somebody has a final nugget.
I think it's easy to get discouraged because
Yes.
a lot of these things we've been working on for a really long time. I know I have. And God's still working on me is what I have to keep saying to myself. Because that little devil on your shoulder or your own negative self-talk will say, really, this is how far you've come?
Right.
Why didn't you even try?
Yeah, yeah.
But God is still.
That's right. That's right. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much that you sent your Holy Spirit to be with us and to help us grow this fruit. Lord, it's a gift that you have have given us, and that you want us to grow and develop and bear these fruit for you, Lord. I pray that you will help us each day, Lord, to surrender our control of our lives to you, to give you the control, and not to be jaded in thinking that we can control ourselves, Lord God. And I just pray for everyone in this class that you'll bring these things to mind as we go through the next few weeks. Remind us of the fruit that you want us to bear, and help us to continually strive to be fruit-bearing, Lord, and to yield our lives to you. Now I pray that you'll be with each one, that you'll protect them and guide them as they go through the next week, keep them healthy, and we thank you for it. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So next week.